Chapter 1. The child of no world I remember him not as flesh, nor as the fragile wail of an infant's first breath. I remember him as a tremor, a ripple in the ocean of the Force, too deep for the untrained to feel, yet sharp enough to cut. The awareness of the old masters. No world claims his birth, no records, no family name, no lineage to anchor him in the galaxy's archives. He was, from the first heartbeat, a child of the void, claimed not by blood, but by the currents that flow unseen. The Jedi Temple became his cradle, its high towers watching him as an unblinking host of stone and steel. The Order's archives hold no tales of laughter from his youth. They speak instead of a silence that followed him, an attentiveness beyond his years, a gaze that unsettled instructors who had taught hundreds before him. In the echo of my memory, I see him walking alone between the temple's marble pillars, his small hand brushing the carvings of battles fought long before his time, as if he could hear the voices trapped within them. Even then, he did not learn as others learned. He absorbed. He did not recite what he was told. He bent it, shaped it, tested its edges. The masters called him gifted. I call him restless. In his eyes burned a hunger the Jedi could not name, for it was not the hunger for victory, nor the hunger for belonging. It was the hunger for the truth beneath the truth, the answer behind the answer. The forbidden question whispered in the void between stars. The Force clung to him with a strange intimacy, not as a guide, but as a shadow. At times it moved before him, as if clearing a path unseen. At other times it pulled him toward corners the Jedi would not have wished him to see, the darker chambers of the archives. The names struck from the record, the artifacts locked behind obsidian seals. I remember his fingers lingering upon the ancient script of worlds forgotten, his breath held as though listening to something deep beneath the temple's hum. There were moments, rare but undeniable, when the boy would stare into the air before him, eyes unfocused, lips parted, as though he were hearing a voice no one else could. The other younglings whispered that he spoke to ghosts. The masters dismissed it as imagination. They were wrong. He was not hearing ghosts. He was hearing the pull of the future, the scent of a destiny already weaving itself around him. He was a child, yet he was never truly young. The training halls could not contain him. The rituals of meditation, the rigid drills, the sparring, circles, all these were cages. He excelled, yes, but with the air of one enduring a necessary delay, as if waiting for the galaxy to ask him the question he was meant to answer. Patience was never his virtue. Purpose was, and it bled from him in a way that made others uneasy. I watched him grow into a knight in all but name, though the council hesitated to grant him the title. They sensed it to the edge within him, the fire that could burn bright enough to guide worlds, or burn deep enough to hollow him from within. They cloaked their caution in teachings of restraint, warnings about the danger of attachment and the seduction of power. He listened, he remembered every word, and he weighed them against what the Force was whispering in his bones, for the Force spoke differently to him than it did to others. To the Jedi, it was a current to be read and followed, a river that carried them toward harmony. To him, it was an ocean that could be shaped, redirected, made to crash upon the shores of enemies or recede into depths where none could find it. He did not see it as sacred balance. He saw it as potential, infinite, dangerous, waiting to be claimed. Even then, I knew. He would not remain here forever. The temple's walls could not hold him. The doctrines could not anchor him. And the galaxy beyond was already shifting, already darkening. There were war drums in the outer rim, faint and distant, but growing louder, and I felt the moment approaching when he would hear them, when the call would come, not from the council, but from the destiny he could not refuse. The child of no world would soon choose a world to save, and in saving it, he would begin to lose himself. Chapter 2. The Mandalorian War. Drums. The first rumble was not in the stars. It was in the Force, a low, patient thunder that crawled across the edges of awareness. Too distant for the complacent to notice, but clear to those whose hearts were restless. He felt it long before the Jedi Council acknowledged it. A cold vibration. Beneath every meditation, a whisper at the edge of every dream. The Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders were stirring. They were not pirates, nor scattered clans fighting for scraps. They were an army of creed and armor, forged in the old warrior ways, sweeping across the outer rim like a tide of fire and Beskar. Worlds burned in their wake. Cities fell silent, except for the sound of boots upon ashes. To most in the core, it was a distant rumor. To the boy who would become Revan, it was an open wound in the galaxy's skin. The council sat in shadowed chambers, weighing their decisions with the slowness of stone. They feared the war's gravity. They feared its hunger for Jedi lives. But their greatest fear was unspoken, that by joining the conflict, they might ignite something older and darker than the Mandalorian threat itself. So they chose stillness. They chose inaction. Yet stillness was poison to him. Each report of a raised colony, each refugee ship that limped into the mid-rim with hollow eyes, carved deeper into him. He had learned all his life that the Force was meant to protect the innocent. Now the Force whispered that the innocent were dying while those sworn to defend them sat in perfect stillness. He began to speak quietly at first, to peers, to friends. Malak listened, others listened. He asked why they trained for war, if not to fight it. He asked whether obedience was truly the highest Jedi virtue, or if it was merely fear in another robe. The council heard of his questions. They cautioned. Him, they urged patience. But patience was not what the Force was telling him. In the darkness between stars, that whisper he had known since boyhood was no longer patient. It was insistent. It pressed at the edges of his mind, urging him to move, to act, to step beyond the still circle of the council's teachings. And with every day that passed, the thunder grew louder. One night, while the temple's spires were bathed in the pale light of Coruscant's moons, he stood on the highest balcony and stared at the galaxy stretched before him. Ships traced silent paths of light through the sky, each a mote in the greater weave of fate. In that moment, he knew the council would never move quickly enough. The tide would have to be met by those willing to be carried into its teeth. I felt it then, the first fracture in his bond with the Order. Small, almost invisible, yet sharp enough to divide loyalty from duty. He would not yet break from them, but the decision was already forming, like a blade still hidden in its sheath. Soon, the war drums would no longer be a whisper in the Force. They would be a call to arms, and he would answer. Chapter 3. The knight who defied the council. The decision was not made in a single heartbeat. It grew in him as a storm grows in the black horizon, silent, patient, then sudden and unstoppable. The council clung to stillness, their words wrapped in careful logic, their eyes reflecting the glow of ancient doctrine. They spoke of caution, of the danger of being drawn too far into the outer rim's bloodshed. They spoke of the Mandalorians as a test, a storm that must break itself upon the Republic before the Jedi would act. But he had walked among the refugees. He had seen children with the smell of fire still on their skin. He had heard the hollow silence in the voices of those who had lost entire worlds. The Mandalorian crusade was no storm to wait out. It was a blade pressed against the galaxy's throat when he spoke in the Hall of Knighthood. His voice was not the voice of a questioning student. It was the voice of command. He called for action, for the gathering of Jedi willing to stand in the gap the Council had left open. He spoke of duty, not to the Order, but to the living beings suffering beyond the temple spires. Many turned, their faces away, unwilling to look at the truth behind his words. But some, just enough, met his gaze and felt the pull of his conviction. Malak stood at his side, taller, broader, but always in the shadow of Revan's vision. They spoke together in quiet corners, away from the Council's ears. Plans formed, names were spoken in secrecy. Jedi who shared their discontent, officers in the Republic fleet who were desperate for aid. It began as a circle of whispers. It would end as an army. The moment of break came without ceremony. He did not shout defiance. He simply left. A ship waited for him in the temple hangar, its engines already warm. Malak was there, as were the first of those who would follow knights and Padawans, willing to trade obedience for the uncertainty of war. No master came to stop them. Perhaps none dared. Perhaps some knew, deep down, that the Council's stillness would doom more than the war. As the ship lifted from the temple's cradle of stone and light, Coruscant's towers fell away beneath them. The planet's endless glow became a memory, replaced by the cold glitter of the void. Ahead lay the burning worlds of the Outer Rim, the Mandalorian fleets, and the promise of a war that would demand everything they had. In the silent depths between stars, the Force swelled around him. It no longer whispered. It no longer urged. It spoke a single, clear truth that filled the marrow of his bones. You are the hand that will shape what comes. The Council called it disobedience. The Republic called it hope. The Holocron calls it the first step onto the blade's edge. Chapter 4. The Crimson Front War remakes the galaxy in fire and silence. Revan learned this quickly. The Outer Rim was no longer a scattered frontier. It was a wound stretching from system to system. Bleeding under the steel boots of the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, where the Jedi Council had seen chaos, Revan saw a battlefield that could be shaped. Where the Republic fleet had seen retreat, he saw the lines of a greater design. From the first engagement, his mind became the weapon the galaxy feared most. He moved fleets as if they were living things, coiling them around Mandalorian advances, striking with precision where others saw only hopeless siege. Every victory carved his name deeper into the hearts of the soldiers who followed him. They began to speak of him not as Knight Revan, but as the Commander, a title that bore more weight than any rank the Order had given him. Yet for all his brilliance, the war demanded payment. Planets were glassed to deny Mandalorian footholds. Cities were abandoned to lure enemies into traps. Republic officers who hesitated at his orders found themselves replaced. It was not cruelty, it was necessity, sharpened into something colder. Every choice that saved thousands cost hundreds. Every move forward left a graveyard in its wake. It was on Cathar that the war began to stain him. The Mandalorians had left the planet's surface littered with bones, a massacre that the Force itself seemed unable to cleanse. Standing in the crimson dust, he swore an unspoken vow that no such slaughter would go unanswered. Those who were with him say the air grew heavier, as if the planet itself had pressed its grief into his lungs. When he left, he carried a piece of that weight with him, invisible but unshakable. The mask entered his life soon after. It had belonged to a Mandalorian warrior of fearsome renown, a hunter who had refused to yield even in defeat. Revan took it not as a trophy, but as a mantle. From that day, his face was hidden, and the man behind it became a symbol. To the Republic, the mask was hope. To the Mandalorians, it was a warning. To the Force, it was a turning. The crimson front stretched across star maps like veins of blood. Every advance was marked by the burn of plasma and the cold hum of a lightsaber cutting through the heart of the enemy's will. His tactics grew harsher, more exacting. Victory, once a distant hope, became inevitable wherever he stood. Yet the Holocron does not speak of victory without speaking of its cost. In the shadows of his triumphs, a darker voice began to follow him, faint at first, then closer, then clearer. It was not the voice of the Council. It was not the voice of the Jedi Code. It was something older, something that called him by a name he had not yet learned was his. And still, he marched forward, deeper into the war, deeper into the place where light and shadow become indistinguishable. Chapter 5. The Mass Shadow Trap Malachor V was not chosen by chance. Revan's war had become a sequence of deliberate inevitabilities. Each battle not only a strike against the Mandalorians, but a tightening of the noose around their leader, Mandalore the Ultimate. Malachor was to be the final tightening, the place where the war would be decided in one violent stroke. The planet was a wound in space, its skies heavy with storms, its surface jagged with black stone that seemed to drink the light. Even before the fleets arrived, the force here was thick, oppressive, as if the world itself remembered every death it had ever swallowed. Revan felt it in his bones. It did not repel him, it welcomed him. His plan was precise, merciless. The mass shadow generator, a weapon beyond the comprehension of most Republic tacticians, had been installed on the planet's surface, hidden until the moment of need. It was a device capable of collapsing gravity wells, of folding space into itself, of crushing fleets in an instant. It was the kind of weapon the Jedi Code would never sanction. It was the kind of weapon Revan no longer sought permission to use. The Mandalorians came in force, their ships darkening the sky. The Republic fleet met them, but not to fight a battle in the old way. Every movement, every feint, every sacrifice was meant to draw the enemy closer to the world's surface, into the invisible jaws Revan had prepared. The cost was staggering, ships abandoned, crews knowingly thrown into hopeless engagements to hold the line long enough. Even Malak hesitated, his voice taut over the coms, questioning whether the trap was worth what it demanded. Revan did not answer. The answer was already written in the silence between his words. When the signal was given, it was not with ceremony or flourish. It was a single command, quiet but absolute. The massed shadow generator roared to life. Space buckled. Ships screamed in their death throes, twisted into shrapnel by the crushing pull of gravity gone mad. The Mandalorian fleet shattered, its formations collapsing into the gravity well that tore at holes and broke crews into dust. But the Republic was not spared. Thousands of its own vessels were too close, their engines unable to resist the pull. In moments, the sky was nothing but fire, metal, and silence. Mandalore the Ultimate was brought before Revan, defeated but unbroken. No trial was offered, no mercy. Their duel was brief, inevitable. When it ended, Revan took the mask from Mandalore's lifeless body and set it upon his own face. It was not the act of a victor, but of a man sealing something away, Perhaps his past, perhaps his name. The war was over. The Republic rejoiced. The Jedi Council prepared to recall its knights. But the holocron remembers that in the quiet after Malachor, something shifted. The boy who had defied the Council, the knight who had led the war, did not return home. His gaze turned instead to the dark beyond the outer rim, to a presence he had felt only faintly until now, a will older, colder, and more patient than the war he had just ended. The mass shadow generator had ended the Mandalorians. It had also ended the last remnants of the Jedi he once was. Chapter 6. The Emperor's Chainsther. War's embers still glowed in the galaxy's corners when Revan turned his fleet away from the core. The Republic waited for its hero's return. The Jedi Council waited for the moment to summon him to answer for his defiance. Neither would see him again. His path was not random. It followed a thread only he could feel, a cold pulse in the Force, steady, unyielding, drawing him toward the farthest edges of known space. There was no chart to guide him, no hyperspace lane marked in the archives. Only a whisper in the dark, older than the Republic, older than the Jedi, older even than the Mandalorian creed. Malak followed, as did the most loyal of their war-forged soldiers. The further they traveled, the stranger the stars became light, bent oddly. The air aboard their ships thickened, and dreams turned heavy with voices that spoke in no language known to the galaxy. Some of the crew began to lose themselves, their eyes distant, their hands trembling. Others whispered of shapes moving in the space between stars. At last, they reached a world drowned in storms, its surface hidden beneath black clouds that never parted. Lightning danced across its skies like the veins of a dying god. This was Dromund Kaz, the heart of an empire, long thought dead, the seat of the true Sith. It was here they met him, not in open battle, but in presence alone. The Emperor, a will vast enough to fill the air, heavy enough to bend thought itself. His voice was not heard but felt, sinking into their minds, wrapping around their fears and hungers like chains of silk and steel. Revan, who had stood unshaken before Mandalore, felt the weight of that mind pressing into his own. The Emperor did not demand obedience. He rewrote it. Thoughts became not his own. Purpose became not his own. Every memory, every victory, every vow was unraveled and rewoven to serve a single alien design. Malak fell under the same shadow, their bond twisted into a shared servitude. The mask remained upon Revan's face, but now it was more than a symbol. It was a prison gate, holding in what remained of his will, keeping it hidden even from himself. The Emperor gave them fleets, knowledge, and a new war to fight, not for the Republic, not for the Mandalorians, but for the slow, deliberate strangling of the galaxy. The Sith Empire had slept for centuries, watching from beyond the rim. Now it would move, and its first blow would be struck by its newest, brightest weapon, DARTH REVAN. The holocron speaks with unease of this moment, for it is here the shape of the galaxy's future was decided, not by blaster fire, nor by saber's edge, but by the quiet sealing of chains around the mind of a man who believed himself unbreakable. Chapter 7. Darth Revan rises. The fleets that returned from the darkness beyond the outer rim were not the fleets that had departed. Their hulls bore strange markings, etched in scripts no Jedi archive could translate. Their formations moved with an unnatural precision, as though guided not by admirals, but by one singular mind. And at the head of this black armada stood a figure the Republic had once called its savior. The mask was unchanged, yet heavier now, its edges sharpened by the will that commanded it. The robes and armor were no longer the muted tones of a Jedi Knight or the practical plating of a soldier. They were forged for war and ritual, both black and crimson, echoing the colors of the ancient Sith. At his side, Malak bore the same, shadow in his eyes, but in Revan's presence, even Malak seemed smaller, as though the air itself bent toward the masked figure. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command that had won a war. Yet beneath it was something colder, something that did not belong to the man he had once been. He named himself Darth Revan, Dark Lord of the Sith. To the Republic, this was betrayal given form. To the Jedi, it was the prophecy of their oldest fears made flesh. His war began not with raids, but with precision strikes against key Republic worlds, cutting supply lines and scattering fleets. Each battle was calculated, each loss for the Republic a deliberate wound that would bleed into the next confrontation. Yet even as his forces claimed system after system, the holocron insists there was another layer beneath his conquest, a deeper strategy unseen even by his closest followers. The Emperor's orders were vast and absolute, yet somewhere within that web, Revan wove his own threads. The mask became the galaxy's new horizon. To the Republic's soldiers, it was a storm they could not outrun. To the Jedi, it was a test they had no weapon to answer. To the Sith who served under him, it was the sign of a master whose will was law, whose victories were inevitable, and yet, for all his power, there was no joy in his reign. The holocron whispers of moments when his head would tilt, ever so slightly, as if listening for a sound no one else could hear, a sound perhaps from before the chains, from before the mask, from the man who had once been a knight of the Jedi Order. If those echoes stirred him, they did not turn his hand from the path ahead. The Dark Lord advanced. Worlds burned. The Republic began to fracture. And all the while, the shadow behind Revan, the Emperor's shadow, waited for the moment when the galaxy would fall silent beneath its will. Chapter 8. The War of Shadows. The galaxy spoke of war in terms of fleets and sieges. Yet what followed in Revan's campaign was not war as the Republic understood it. It was a slow bleeding of the Jedi Order itself. Republic outposts reported strange disappearances. Ships patrolling hyperlanes were found adrift, their crews missing, their systems intact. Entire enclaves of Jedi vanished without leaving the scorch of battle behind. In their place, there was only silence, and the faint echo of something dark in the Force. Revan's armies moved openly, but his true war was waged in secret. Special strike groups, hand-picked from his most fanatical followers, swept across the galaxy under his direct command. Their purpose was not to destroy the Jedi in battle, but to hunt them, to corner them in temples, on distant worlds, even in the depths of space, and offer them a single choice: kneel or be unmade. Some Jedi resisted, and the Force itself seemed to twist against them in Revan's presence. He knew their forms, their defenses, their strategies, for they had once been his own. His mastery of the dark side allowed him to turn their strengths into weapons against them, draining their will before striking their bodies. Many fell. Some broke and swore allegiance to him, becoming shadows of what they once were. But the holocron speaks of something far stranger, a ritual whispered in ancient Sith tongues, one that Revan used upon the captured Jedi who refused to serve. The words themselves are lost, erased even from the crystal's memory. Yet the result was always the same. The victim's connection to the Force was severed, leaving them hollow, adrift, and utterly powerless. Their eyes, once lit with the clarity of the Jedi path, would stare blank and empty, as if the galaxy itself had abandoned them. Malak delighted in this new war, but for Revan there was calculation. He was not merely serving the Emperor's will, he was building something. Every Jedi taken, every holocron seized, every scrap of forbidden lore gathered, all was drawn into a private vault deep within the black labyrinth of his flagship. Only he entered it. No one knew what was being assembled there. The council grew desperate. They sent strike teams against him, but few returned. And those who did spoke in hushed tones of seeing his mask in their dreams long before the battle began. Some claimed the mask was no longer just a symbol, that it was a conduit, a prison, or perhaps a lens through which something else gazed upon the galaxy. And still Revan pressed on. The war was no longer about borders or worlds. It was about breaking the light until there was nothing left to resist the shadow. Yet, in this campaign of perfect control, there came a fracture, small but dangerous. A single captured Jedi, taken alive aboard his flagship, who would not kneel, who would not break, and whose presence would draw the eyes of powers even Revan could not foresee. Chapter 9. The betrayal of Malak. Power is a knife, and even the hand that wields it cannot escape the pull of its edge. Malak had followed Revan through the fires of the Mandalorian Wars, through the unknown reaches of the galaxy, and through the shadowed corridors of the Sith Empire. He had seen the birth of Darth Revan, and had helped shape it. Yet, within him, the dark seed of ambition stirred, quietly, relentlessly. The betrayal did not arrive with fire or announcement. It arrived in silence. A shift in the lines of command, a misstep in strategy, a hidden whisper to the fleets under his command. Malak sought the throne for himself, convinced that the galaxy, and even the Emperor, could be commanded by him more easily than by the masked Dark Lord. It was aboard the Leviathan-class flagship, deep within contested space, that Malak made his move. He unleashed a strike against Revan's command fleet, a fleet that bore the symbols and legacies of countless victories. Ships fell in silence, officers torn between obedience to Revan and the orders of the traitor at their side. The first attack was small, almost symbolic, yet its meaning was unmistakable. No one was invincible. Not even Darth Revan, the boy who had once been a Jedi Knight. The general who had defied the Council, the architect of the Mandalorian downfall, was caught unaware. The holocron recalls his surprise, though not the fear. Revan did not hesitate. He struck back with precision, bending fleets into maneuvers that Malak could not anticipate. But the betrayal had done its work. It had fractured trust, even among those who had once worshipped him. Malak did not seek to destroy him outright. He sought control, and he sought legacy. The war would continue, but it would now be a war not only against the Republic or the Jedi, but a war within the dark side itself. And Revan would need to reclaim not just his fleets, but the loyalty of those who had followed him into darkness and beyond. The holocron murmurs that it was in these moments of betrayal that the first true cracks appeared in Revan's mind. The mask had hidden the boy. The mask had hidden the man. But it could not hide the doubt, and in that doubt the galaxy saw an opening. A single Jedi strike team, guided by prophecy and desperation, would find its way to Revan, not as soldiers, but as instruments of fate. The first chains of his undoing had been laid, though neither he nor Malak could yet see them. Chapter 10. The puppet of the Jedi. The stars themselves seemed to shiver when he awoke. Not aboard the Leviathan, nor within the command of his fleets, but in a chamber suffused with pale light and sterile calm. He remembered nothing. No wars, no conquests, no mask upon his face. Even his name had been stolen from him. The Jedi Council. stood over him, not as accusers, not as friends, but as architects of a new fate. They called him Revan, though the name felt hollow, borrowed, a shadow of a truth that had been erased. They told him he was a Jedi Knight once more, yet they spoke in riddles and half-truths. Every memory they offered was measured, filtered, chosen to mold him into the weapon they required. The one who could strike Malak without knowing the full darkness he had once commanded. At first, he resisted, though he did not know what he resisted. The Force had become a fog, the currents muddled and uncertain. He felt a pull toward the light, yet beneath it, faint and insistent, were echoes of something older, a memory locked behind a veil he could not lift. The holocron whispers that even without memory, the Force recognized him, bending subtly to his will as though his essence had never been extinguished. The Council trained him with patience, yet with urgency. Lightsaber forms were drilled into him. Meditations, studies, histories of the Republic and Jedi Code, all were taught as if they were the first time he had ever learned them. He absorbed them with a precision that alarmed his instructors. There was no curiosity, no hesitation, only a readiness that seemed unnatural in one so untested. And yet, in quiet moments, when the chamber's light dimmed and the Council withdrew, fragments stirred, a shadow of a face behind a mask, a memory of fleets moving with impossible coordination, a flash of stars bending beneath a warship's wake. He did not yet know what these images meant, but the Force clung to them, and the Force is never silent. The Jedi intended him to be a weapon. They intended him to strike Malak and end the dark tide that threatened the galaxy. But the Holocron remembers the subtlety of the plan. The Council could erase the memory of the man, but they could not erase the shadow of the will. Revan's mind, though blank, remained a conduit, a potential for something far greater than they understood. Malak's shadow loomed in the darkness beyond the rim, still spreading, still commanding. The galaxy believed that the Sith threat was now manageable, that the Dark Lord had been undone. They did not see the spark beneath the calm, the flame of memory and power lying in wait. The holocron whispers that even in chains, even in amnesia, Revan's destiny did not bend entirely to the Council's hand. It waited, patient as the void, for the moment he would remember. And when that memory returned, the galaxy would tremble once more, for the hand that had once built empires, destroyed them, and survived the dark beyond, was not yet finished. Chapter 11. The Return to the Star. Forge the Starforge was older than the Republic, older than the Mandalorians, older even than the first whispers of the Jedi, a vast engine of creation and destruction, built by hands long vanished, its mechanisms hidden in the void beyond known space. It consumed stars as easily as it consumed worlds, bending energy to shape ships, armies, and the very currents of power. To stand before it was to touch eternity and to tremble in its shadow. Revan remembered the Starforge, though he did not yet know he remembered. Fragments of sensation flared in his mind, the heat of its core, the hum of its engines, the weight of endless war pressing upon him. He felt the Force warp here, thick and alive, as if the very machinery of the galaxy was breathing, waiting, hungry. It had called to him before, and it called to him now, a pulse in the darkness, guiding him toward confrontation, toward the reckoning he had long postponed. Malak ruled the Forge with iron certainty, wearing the mantle of Dark Lord like a crown. He had grown fat on the power it gave him, blind to the subtle currents in the Force that whispered of Revan's return. The fleets he commanded were vast, yet brittle, his victories hollow, built on the fear of those who obeyed him. He had claimed the galaxy, but he had not yet claimed the man who had once been his master. When Revan's fleet appeared beyond the Forge's orbit, the very stars seemed to bend, drawn toward the confrontation. Malak's forces surged to meet them, but Revan did not act with the recklessness of a man returning to battle. He moved with purpose, each strike calculated, each engagement a shadow of the strategies he had once perfected as both Jedi and Sith. The Starforge itself seemed to pulse beneath his will, feeding his ships, amplifying his plans, whispering the song of ancient power. The first meeting between master and apprentice was not a clash of lightsabers, nor a roar of fleets. It was a silence thick as stone, a stillness in which the galaxy held its breath. They stood across from one another. In the main chamber, surrounded by the hum of machinery older than memory, Malak's voice was a sneer, dripping with authority and ambition. Revan's voice was calm, deliberate, and beneath it, something darker stirred, a memory of the mask, a spark of the will that could never truly be undone. The battle that followed shattered fleets, twisted the Forge's energies, and bent the Force into shapes few could comprehend. Revan did not merely fight Malak, he unmade him, pulling at his bonds to the dark, severing the threads that held him to the Starforges. Power. The holocron whispers that the apprentice fell, not just to Revan's strength, but to the inevitability of destiny itself, a current in the Force that even the strongest cannot resist. And when the final blow came, Revan did not rejoice. The Starforge hummed beneath him, a reminder of the cost of power, the weight of creation, the shadow of the dark that would always linger. He had defeated Malak, yet the holocron remembers a flicker of doubt in his heart. The mask had been worn. The chains had been broken, and still the galaxy was not safe. The Force itself seemed to whisper that this victory was but a prelude. The path forward would demand more than armies, more than strategy, more than even a Dark Lord's will, for the Starforge could create endlessly and just as easily. It could destroy endlessly. Chapter 12. The awakening of memory is a river, slow to rise, but unstoppable once it reaches its banks. For Revan, the river had been dammed by Jedi teachings, by the chains of amnesia, by the carefully wrought illusions of the Council. But the Starforge, the battles, the shadow of Malak, these were stones against which the dam cracked, and the waters began to flow again. At first, they came as whispers, faint and fractured, the hiss of a lightsaber igniting, the weight of a mask upon his face, the faces of those who had followed him into darkness. Then came visions, the Mandalorian, wars, the fleets in formation, the cries of the conquered and the dead. Each memory tore through him with the clarity of a star exploding, and with each the man he had been, Jedi and Sith intertwined, returned in pieces. He saw the chains the Emperor had wrapped around his mind, and the hand of the Council that had sought to shape him anew. He felt the full scope of the dark side he had once embraced, the hunger for control, the obsession with destiny, and the fires of creation he had ignited and left to burn. And yet, within these recollections, there was understanding, the first faint glimmer of self beyond mask and command. Malak's betrayal, once fresh in memory, now revealed its deeper truth. Loyalty cannot be forced, only earned. Power cannot be wielded without consequence. Revan's heart, long buried beneath shadow and war, beat anew, each pulse carrying the weight of choices made and choices yet to come. The holocron whispers that the awakening did not stop with memory alone. It carried with it clarity of purpose. A vision of the galaxy not as it was, nor as it should be, but as it could be, if the hand that had once shaped both light and dark could now act with foresight, unclouded. The Force responded, bending subtly to his renewed will, yet reminding him of the gravity of every act, and with the memories returned came a vision of a path not yet traveled, a boy named Luke, born in shadow but destined to confront the echo of the darkness he had once embodied. The knowledge of this child struck him with both dread and reverence, for he understood that the future, too, would require the full reckoning of what he had been. Revan's awakening was not triumph, it was not relief, it was the silent, heavy realization that the war within himself was far from over. The mask had revealed power, memory had revealed responsibility, and the galaxy, vast and trembling, waited for the hand that now remembered both the brilliance and the horror of its bearer. The holocron murmurs a warning. Memory is a blade, and the more clearly one remembers, the sharper it becomes. Forever, the river of recollection would not cease, and the tide it carried would soon sweep toward the unknown regions once more. Chapter 13. The path to redemption. Redemption is not a light that dawns, but a shadow that recedes, slowly, uncertainly, leaving only the shape of what might be. For Revan, it began not with triumph, but with a quiet understanding. The galaxy had suffered under his hand, under Malak's, under the designs of those who claimed to guide him. Every world conquered, every life extinguished, every forced victory weighed upon him now with a gravity that no mask or memory could obscure. He did not speak of redemption. He did not seek it as the council might have demanded, nor as the emperor would have mocked. It revealed itself in small choices, in sparing a ship from destruction, in listening to a Jedi survivor who trembled before his presence, in stepping away from fleets poised for slaughter. Each act was deliberate, measured, yet carried the whisper of a conscience long buried beneath ambition and war. Malak remained in the shadows, still dangerous, still unbroken in his hunger for power. The galaxy perceived only the victory of Revan over Malak at Malachor and the Starforge, yet the spectre of his former apprentice loomed, a reminder that the dark side does not yield so easily. Revan knew he could not confront Malak with fleets alone. He would need strategy, subtlety, and the very clarity of mind that memory had restored. The Force itself responded to his intent. It shifted around him like a tide, no longer dark and oppressive, no longer a prison, but a current he could navigate. He began to sense the tremors of the galaxy's suffering, the lingering fear in systems abandoned by the Republic, the echoes of loss among those who had survived his campaigns. These were not punishments he could undo, but they were truths he could acknowledge, and through acknowledgement, he could begin the path toward balance. It was in this period of quiet preparation that he glimpsed the greater thread of destiny. Luke Skywalker, a boy born amidst conflict, untainted by the corruption that had claimed Revan's youth and ambition, yet marked by the potential to confront the darkness that had once consumed the galaxy. The holocron whispers that in this recognition, Revan understood the true purpose of his survival, not to reclaim empire, not to wield power, but to guide, to protect, and, if necessary, to sacrifice for the spark of hope that still remained. The path to redemption is rarely linear. It twists through memory and shadow, through doubt and temptation. Revan's journey would require him to face the remnants of the Sith, the lingering ambition of Malak, and the deep echoes of the Emperor's influence that still lingered beyond the stars. Yet he moved forward, step by step, through the darkness. He had created, each step, a deliberate reclaiming of the self that had been hidden beneath mask, memory, and war. And though the galaxy did not yet understand, the Force knew. The hand that had once unleashed terror now moved toward balance, not as a savior, but as one who had learned the cost of unbridled power. The holocron records that in the silent spaces between stars, the whisper of hope stirred fragile, trembling but undeniable. Revan's path to redemption had begun. The mask, the memory, the war, and the shadow of Malak all remained, yet beneath them. A man re-emerged, not perfect, not forgiven, but awake, aware, and prepared to face the final reckoning that destiny demanded. Chapter 14. The Duel with Malak. The void between stars grew heavy with anticipation as Revan approached Malak's flagship, the Leviathan, a fortress of shadow and steel. This confrontation was not merely a battle of fleets, though thousands of vessels trembled in formation, nor of sabers alone, though the hum of the lightsaber sang its deadly hymn. It was a reckoning of souls, a collision of purpose and destiny, where every choice of the past and every shadow of the present would meet in one defining moment. Malak awaited him within the throne chamber, eyes aflame with ambition and fear intertwined. The dark apprentice had become a dark master, yet Revan now possessed clarity that Malak could not anticipate. Memory, the Force, and the weight of redemption converged in him, forging a resolve far stronger than the raw hunger that had consumed. Malak, the holocron whispers that this encounter had been prophesied in fragments, in scattered texts, in the echo of wars long past, a duel whose outcome would ripple across time and space. When the sabers ignited, the sound was a whisper compared to the roar of destiny around them. Crimson and scarlet blades danced and clashed, weaving patterns in the air that mirrored the currents of the Force itself. The duel was not fast. It was deliberate, each strike and parry an echo of history, of lessons learned, of the sins they had committed and the futures they could no longer escape. Malak's attacks were fierce, born of anger and betrayal. But Revan's responses were precise, calm, and guided by the Force's quiet wisdom. Every strike he had once made to conquer now served to protect, to dismantle the shadow he had helped create, to liberate both himself and the galaxy from Malak. Tyranny. The battle moved through the chamber like a ritual, the Force bending around them, amplifying every movement, every breath, every flicker of thought. At last, Revan's blade pressed against Malak's chest. The moment of choice crystallized in the weight of eternity. Malak's eyes, wide with disbelief, searched for the anger he expected, but found only purpose. It was not hatred that ended the duel, but inevitability, the calm certainty of a man who remembered all he had been and all he must now be. Malak fell, defeated, his ambition extinguished, yet not without leaving its mark. The galaxy would remember his shadow for years, but the war that had defined Revan's rise, fall, and return was finally concluded. The holocron murmurs that the duel did not bring triumph in joy, but in understanding. The price of darkness had been paid, the hand of the past confronted, and the first true step toward balance taken. Yet even in victory, the echoes of the Emperor lingered. The chains that had once bound Revan's mind had been broken, but the influence of the dark beyond the stars had not vanished entirely. The galaxy was free of Malak, yet still shrouded in uncertainty, awaiting the return of the true shadow from the unknown regions. And in the silence that followed, Revan felt the first stirrings of what was to come, a future where hope, temptation, and destiny would once again converge in the heart of a boy named Luke. Chapter 15. The threat beyond the unknown. the galaxy exhaled, briefly, as Malak fell. Systems whispered of relief, fleets returned to ports, and the Jedi Council allowed themselves a measure of cautious hope. But Revan did not linger in celebration, nor did he seek recognition. The Force had shifted beneath him once more, subtle, cold, and patient, like the breath of something vast that watched from beyond the stars. The holocron murmurs that the unknown regions are not empty. They are a vast, waiting expanse where shadows consolidate, where the dark side festers and waits, and where the Emperor's influence, though diminished, still coils like a serpent among the stars. Revan felt it in the currents of the Force, a presence ancient, vast, and unyielding. It was not Malak, it was something far older, something that had shaped the dark long before Revan or the Jedi existed. He consulted the holocrons and the scattered Jedi records, but their knowledge was thin, fragmented. Legends spoke of a Sith empire that had slept beyond the rim, waiting for a time to rise again. Legends spoke of the Emperor, a being who wielded not just fleets, but minds and souls across decades and centuries. Revan realized that the threat they faced was not just physical, but spiritual, cosmic, the kind of darkness that warps the very will of those who stand against it. Ships were prepared, fleets assembled, yet Revan knew that mere firepower could not confront this. The weapon he had once wielded, the Starforge, was not enough. Malak's defeat was merely a prelude. Beyond the known, in the shadows of the unknown, lay the true test of the galaxy's balance, a force that could corrupt or consume anyone, even one who had walked both light and dark. The holocron whispers that this realization weighed heavily on him. The mask, once a symbol of war and fear, now felt like a reminder of what vigilance demanded. Revan knew that to secure peace, he would need more than armies, more than strategy, more than his mastery of the Force. He would need foresight, restraint, and the courage to confront the unknown without succumbing to its temptation. And so he began preparations, gathering knowledge, seeking allies among those who had survived the wars, and probing the Force for signs of what lay ahead. Every step was deliberate, every choice measured. The shadow of the Emperor lingered, but Revan was no longer a puppet. He was a sentinel. Yet the holocron reminds us, the threat beyond the unknown is patient. It does not strike with fury, but with inevitability. It waits for weakness, hesitation, and doubt. Revan's vigilance would be tested. The galaxy's fate hung in the balance, poised between memory, redemption, and the ever-present pull of darkness. The whispers end with a single warning. The war may have ended in the known galaxy, but beyond the stars, the shadow waits, eternal, watchful, and hungry. Chapter 16. The Lost Apprentice in the Quiet Between Wars. In the spaces where the Force whispered and the stars held their breath, Revan sensed a presence, faint, flickering, unformed. Not Malak, not the Emperor. Something new, fragile, yet potent, struggling to find its place in the galaxy. A spark in the darkness. The holocron murmurs that this was the first time in centuries Revan felt the Force not as command, not as weight, but as echo, as potential. The presence was untrained, unshaped, and yet it resonated with a familiar rhythm, one that stirred memories of both light and dark. It was a child, not yet known to the galaxy, yet destined to encounter the echoes of Revan's past, the shadows of the Sith, and the weight of hope that he had barely reclaimed. He found the boy on a remote storm-tossed planet, hidden from the maps of Republic and Sith alike. The boy's eyes flared with fear and curiosity, each movement unsteady, yet the force wove around him like a nascent melody. Revan did not speak immediately. He observed. He remembered his own journey, the hunger for knowledge, the seduction of power, the chains of obedience and betrayal, and he saw all of it reflected in the child. Teaching began not with lightsabers, nor with doctrines of Jedi or Sith. It began with caution, with restraint, with the understanding that the boy must choose his path, yet must also understand the weight of every choice. Revan whispered the stories of war, of mask and memory, of conquest and betrayal, of redemption and loss. Each story was a lesson, a warning, and a fragment of a truth that could not be fully understood until it was lived. Yet even as he guided the boy, Revan sensed the pull of the unknown pressing upon them. The Emperor's shadow still lingered in the far reaches, the remnants of Malak's influence still stirred in the galaxy, and the Force itself trembled at the choices yet to be made. The holocron records that Revan felt both hope and dread. Hope for the boy's potential, dread for the darkness that always follows power. The child, unknowing, would grow to challenge Revan in ways he had never anticipated, for the Force does not bend solely to experience or mastery. It bends to the unpredicted, to the innocent, to the choices made with untested hearts. Revan understood that the lessons he imparted were as much for himself as for the boy, a mirror, a reminder, and a path toward the balance he had sought for decades. And in the shadows beyond, the Emperor watched. A new player had entered the stage, one who could tip the scales. Revan had struggled to reclaim. The holocron whispers, a chilling prophecy. The lost apprentice may either be salvation, or the instrument of undoing, for both Master and Galaxy. Chapter 17. The shadow of the Emperor. Even in defeat, the Emperor's presence endured. It was not bound to flesh, fleet, or throne. It was a current in the Force, a hunger that threaded through the hearts of leaders, soldiers, and the forgotten alike, shaping events in silence. Revan sensed it as one senses a storm on the horizon. Distant, immense, inevitable, from the unknown regions. Whispers carried into the galaxy. Fleets moved unbidden. Systems fell into chaos, and shadows walked where no shadow should exist. Revan knew these were not random acts. They were the Emperor's hand, patient and deliberate, reaching across time and space to test, to bend, to corrupt. Even his memory, so recently reclaimed, could not fully discern the scale of the threat. It was cosmic, omnipresent, and ancient. Holocron records that Revan spent long hours in meditation, seeking a way to counteract the unseen influence. He taught the apprentice not only combat, but vigilance, discipline, and the subtle arts of sensing distortion in the Force. The child learned to feel the pull of shadows before they manifested, to recognize manipulation, and to respond with clarity rather than fear. It was a lesson in foresight, in balance, and in resisting temptation, lessons Revan himself had learnt through blood, betrayal, and memory. Yet the Emperor's shadow was patient beyond reckoning. He did not strike with fleets alone, nor with open armies. He struck with deceit, planting whispers of rebellion among allies, sowing mistrust in councils, and subtly corrupting those who believed themselves immune. Even the holocron admits that some Jedi, loyal and wise, fell victim to the unseen manipulation, their actions bending unknowingly toward the Emperor's will. Revan and the apprentice were tested constantly. Every encounter, every decision, every alliance bore the weight of unseen observation. The Emperor's presence seemed to reach beyond them, probing their thoughts, waiting for hesitation, for doubt, for the smallest opening. The dark echoes whispered, "The galaxy can never be free, for darkness is eternal, and all who wield power are temporary." Yet Revan had learned, through memory and pain, that awareness itself is a shield. He taught the apprentice to perceive without being ensnared, to act without being compelled, and to trust in the Force, not the manipulations of shadows. It was an uneasy vigilance, a constant balancing act between hope and fear, light and dark. The holocron closes this chapter with a warning. The Emperor's shadow does not vanish with victory. It waits, it watches, it bends the currents of destiny, shaping events toward ends only it can foresee. And in the heart of Revan, the mask of the past, the memory of conquest, and the flame of redemption now burned together, ready to confront whatever dark tide approached from beyond the stars. Chapter 18. The fulfillment of destiny. The galaxy held its breath. Time itself seemed to pause, as though the Force waited for a single moment to decide the fate of all it encompassed. Revan, the master of shadows and light, the bearer of memory, mask, and redemption, stood at the edge of choice, the apprentice at his side, both poised between what had been and what must come. The Starforge, Malak, and the Emperor were now echoes in the greater tapestry, reminders of the hunger and corruption that shaped history. Yet the true reckoning was not in the past, nor in the battles won or lost. It was in the convergence of will, intent, and destiny itself. The holocron whispers that destiny is not given, but recognized. It is a thread stretched taut, waiting for the hand brave enough to weave it toward balance. Revan's apprentice, untested yet resolute, mirrored the reflection of what he had been: vulnerable, uncertain yet potent in the Force. The boy carried hope, yes, but also the weight of choice. Every lesson, every story, every shadow of Revan's own past was a guide and a warning. Together, master and pupil confronted the lingering darkness, not with fleets or weapons alone, but with understanding, the comprehension that the Force is neither servant nor master, but a living current demanding both humility and courage. The Emperor's shadow, vast and patient, reached once more, seeking to bend the galaxy to ruin. But Revan and the apprentice acted as one, their wills interwoven, their connection to the Force luminous, unbroken by fear or desire. The confrontation was subtle yet cosmic, a ballet of currents, intentions, and echoes. Every act of will shaped the destiny of stars, systems, and generations yet unborn. And in that moment, the prophecy whispered, broken and scattered across centuries, was fulfilled. The balance that the galaxy had long sought was not imposed, but realized. Light and dark did not vanish, but they no longer consumed without reckoning. Revan's redemption, hard-won and absolute, illuminated a path not only for himself, but for the apprentice, for the boy who would become a symbol. For the galaxy itself, the holocron whispers one final truth: the mask may fall, memory may return, darkness may rise again, yet the current of the Force is eternal. It flows through those who remember, those who learn, and those brave enough to act with both understanding and compassion. Revan, the master, the redeemer, the shadow, and the light, gazed upon the galaxy with eyes unmasked, heart unchained, and spirit free, and in the silent spaces between stars, the Force itself seemed to sigh. balance had been restored, not permanently, not perfectly, but for this moment, a fragile, sacred, and enduring testament to choice, memory, and destiny. The echoes fade, leaving only the quiet hum of the galaxy, the whisper of stars, and the enduring presence of one who had walked the shadow and emerged into the light. The story ends, and yet the Force continues.